So, good evening and welcome to the first formal debate by candidates running for Congress in the Illinois 12th U.S. Congressional District. They are St. Clair County State's Attorney Brendan Kelly and SIU Professor Randy Auxier. Incumbent Republican Mike Bost was invited to attend but did not accept the invitation because of a prior commitment. The candidates will be questioned by Beth Hunsdorfer of the Belleville News Democrat, Jennifer Fuller of WSIU Public Broadcasting, Allie Quick of the Southern Illinois newspaper, and Teresa Flanders of the League of Women Voters of St. Clair County. We'll start with the first 2-minute opening statement from each candidate, the order of which was determined by a coin flip before the debate. So Brendan Kelly will get the first opening statement.
Great, thank you. All right, Mike. Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here tonight. Thank you to all of you that are here. I'm Brendan Kelly. I am a father of 2 sons. I am a husband. My wife is an oncology nurse, and that's where she is right now, taking care of patients. And I've been the state's attorney for the past 8 years. Before that, I served in the United States Navy. And I have been running for Congress now for over a year. And I have put literally thousands of miles on my car, going from one end of the district to the other, hitting every single county, dozens of communities here in Southern Illinois. I've held over 14 town halls now, which anybody is invited to. And as I've done that, I've noticed that if you show up and you listen, you can learn a lot about what's going on with people in Southern Illinois. And you learn what's going on in Washington is not working for them now. I hear the same thing over and over again. People see the stock market going up, but they also see the cost of their health care going up, the cost of their prescriptions going up, the cost of getting an education going up, the cost of their cable bills going up, the price of gas is going up. All those things are going up, but what's not going up are their wages, the money they take home. And they see our infrastructure crumbling, our roads, our bridges, our access to clean water, those are all falling apart. And they're very concerned about the main economic engines of Southern Illinois. They're worried about Southern Illinois University. They're worried about threats to Scott Air Force Base. They're worried about Southern Illinois healthcare and our rural hospitals. But the thing that makes them angriest, that they are most concerned about, is the flow of money into our political system that's corrupting our democracy. And because I've listened and I've heard what they have to say, I have 2 plans. I want to talk about those 2 plans tonight, and I look forward to the opportunity to be able to discuss those further with you. Thank you.
Mr. Auxier.
I want to thank the Belleville News Democrat, the League of Women's Voters, and WSIU, and Lindenwood University Belleville for sponsoring this event and for its decision to be inclusive of third-party candidates. My name is Randy Auxier. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. I have lived in Southern Illinois since 2000, so I'm well into my 18th year here. And the reason I moved here is because I got my dream job at Southern Illinois University Carbondale. I'm not a politician, I'm a teacher. I love my career. I never thought I would be running for office. However, there is something that goes well back beyond the time that I moved here, and that is the first presidential election I ever voted in was 1980, and Jimmy Carter was running against Ronald Reagan, and I voted for John Anderson. I think even then I had the feeling that something wasn't working in our 2-party system. The year, in fact, just 3 months after my wife Gay and I moved to Southern Illinois, we joined the Green Party, and the Green Party is growing, and its numbers increase with every election, and I expect that's going to happen this time too. Make no mistake, I'm in this race to win it. But with that said, I think that giving people an alternative to the way that the Republicans and the Democrats have misrepresented this country is what I'm here for. It's the reason I'm running. I want people to have an alternative, and I think that my thinking about the issues will become clear as the evening goes on. I agree with the Democrats about a number of things. I agree with the Republicans about a few things. But I'm willing to work with anyone who's willing to work with me. And I agree with Brendan that we have to get the money out of politics. We need electoral reform worse than we need anything else in this country, and we need health care pretty badly in this country. And so I want to thank you for inviting me, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you both. Our first question comes from Beth Mansdorfer from the Belleville News Democrat to Mr. Kelly.
Good evening, candidates. Congressman Jerry Costello was a big supporter of Scott Air Force Base. Some studies have shown that the base contributes $3 billion to the local economy. What do you see as your role in maintaining the base and possibly expanding operations at Scott?
Well, Scott Air Force Base is the reason that I'm here in the first place. My mother and father, who spent their whole life working for the Department of Defense, they come from a long history of military service and public service, and they came here with me as a young kid to Southern Illinois because of Scott Air Force Base. And the men and women that work out at Scott Air Force Base, where Transcom is headquartered, which is responsible for all the logistics around the entire world for the Department of Defense, they have a plan. They have a plan every time they're moving a part or a widget or some piece of equipment or some supply from one corner of the earth to the other. They have a plan from point A to point B. But you know who doesn't have a plan? Congress. They have no plan when it comes to our national security. They have no plan about what our national security policy is supposed to be. We have troops all over the world, all over the world. Maybe they should be in some of those conflicts, maybe they shouldn't be. But we have no unified national security policy. We're not having those debates, we're not having those discussions about what our plan should be as a country. And that just doesn't affect our national security, it does affect Scott Air Force Base. Because if we don't have a clear national defense policy, that always puts Scott Air Force Base at risk, the future of Scott Air Force Base. And you know who also doesn't have a plan? Mr. Boss doesn't have a plan. We had the easiest deal in the history of Southern Illinois to be able to bring the NGA here to Scott Air Force Base. By all rights, it should be here. Everyone objectively agrees that it belongs here at Scott Air Force Base. And unlike other congressmen before him who brought assets to Scott Air Force Base, he was not able to do that. He doesn't have a plan. Even when his party took over the White House, he did nothing to try to change that and flip that because he has no plan. So our Scott Air Force Base and the jobs that are associated with Scott Air Force Base, the impact on the economy, it is at risk as long as Congress continues to do what it's doing now, which is nothing. They have no plan.
Mr. Auxier.
The defense industry is a great concern of mine and of the Green Party generally speaking. We believe that peace is good for business. It is not that I or anyone associated with my campaign opposes the military or in any way wishes to dismiss the importance of what they do. But I have to be honest that cutting the defense budget is extremely high on my priority list so that social services, healthcare, education can get the funding that they need. Right at the moment, the Trump administration has saddled us with, the numbers came out today, $750 billion in debt for this year alone, increasing the national debt. If we're going to decide what our priorities are in this country, increasing defense spending while going further into the red is not the path forward. I would say holding the line on defense spending as it is or cutting it significantly is my view of what we need to do in order to take care of our people.
Next question is from Jennifer Fuller from WSIU for Randy Auxier.
Mr. Auxier, how would you reform tax policies, address income inequality, and protect the middle class?
That's a very good question, and I hope I have a good answer. I believe that the tax structure that we actually had when Ronald Reagan came into office was a pretty workable tax structure. I think that the cuts that the Republicans brought us this past year, possibly the most irresponsible thing that Congress has done in my lifetime, cutting the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21% and adding $1 trillion in debt per year as a result of that money has to come from somewhere. So one of the first things we need to do is repeal the Republican tax plan that was passed this past year. I do not believe over the long haul that is the right way forward. In terms of saving the middle class, I honestly believe that the current tax plan, and these are the successive versions of tax reform that the Republicans have introduced since Ronald Reagan became president, is what has destroyed our middle class. And so that structure that we had in about 1980, I think was a workable structure. And so something approaching that is what I would choose.
You know, as I've been campaigning and out meeting people and traveling around the district, I met a guy named Jimmy. He's a former Teamster. And I met him at a gas station in Mount Vernon, and he was unloading crates of water and crates of soda. He worked for a distributorship. And we just struck up a conversation, and he told me that it used to be a Teamster, used to be in a union. But the owners of the business said, if you get rid of your union, then we'll give you a little pay raise. We'll give you a pay raise. So they got rid of the union. They gave them a little pay raise, but they got rid of their benefits. They got rid of their health care. They got rid of all the things that were important for their retirement, all their worker protections. They get rid of all those things. And that's just a perfect example of why in an economy where the stock market's doing great and people at the top are doing really, really well, wages have not gone up. Particularly here in Southern Illinois. If you look county by county by county, this is one of the worst places in the country in terms of wage growth. So if we're going to help the middle class, we have to stand up for organized labor, because organized labor not just helps people that are members of organized labor, but also helps everybody else in the middle class. We would have no middle class if it wasn't for organized labor, and the people that are in power now are doing everything they can to destroy organized labor. But we also have to make sure, yes, I believe in tax relief for people in the middle class, absolutely. But what was passed by Congress this past year, right before Christmas, was a huge giveaway to people at the top. People that were already doing really, really well, like the big banks, the big pharmaceutical companies, the Bruce Rounders of the world, that were already doing very nicely. And so that tax policy is the exact opposite of what we need to do. And I think we need to go in there and look for ways to make sure we have a tax cut permanent for the middle class and to close all these loopholes that they created that are benefiting the people at the top. We need to take care of the middle class here in Southern Illinois first.
Allie Quick has a question first directed to Randy Auxier.
If either of you wins this race, you'll be joining the House of Representatives as a freshman legislator. How do you plan to build connections with your colleagues, especially those colleagues that are in a different political party?
I actually think that I'm in the best possible position to do that, precisely because I don't have to answer to any higher sort of authority that tells me who I can and can't work with. I think that my availability to work with anyone who wants to work with me is a real starting place. In addition to that, since I don't sit on either side of the aisle, I can sit in the middle of it and they have to get past me in order to cross it. I really think that the Green Party platform and my particular version of those ideas will appeal to both sides in various ways and various issues. And I stand ready to work with anybody who's willing to work with me. I think that should I win this contest, it's going to be international news and I would be the first beast of my kind out there. And I think the press is going to like it. And I think I know what to do with that opportunity. And that opportunity, I can bring a lot of attention and positive attention to Southern Illinois. I think you'd be proud of me.
Well, I think it's pretty clear, if it's not been clear already, that I am willing to challenge the leadership in my own party. I've been very clear about the need for a change in leadership in my own party as well as the other party. As someone who's been a prosecutor for the past 8 years and had to make some tough decisions, I've been willing to do what my oath requires me to do, which is to even take on corruption within my own party, people that are part of the Democratic Party. I'm very excited about the huge number of veterans that are running this election cycle. And a lot of us talk to each other already. People that are not members of Congress. We're all talking to each other and we're very excited about the prospect of all these new people coming in. Because when I served in the Navy, I was on a very, very small ship, a crew of about 50 guys. And we had people from all walks of life, black, white, young, old, all religions, all working together, focused on the mission, focused on serving our country. And I am very excited about the prospect of being in with a group of those type of people that are kind of to come into office, people that are already talking about how we're going to smash the rules, the seniority rules that are put in place. These lifelong politicians who build up these centers of power around them rather than building up centers of power around good policy and things that help people here in Southern Illinois. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity on the horizon. You just have to show some courage and be willing to take on the fights that have to be fought, including in your own party. And we'll be able to overcome the divide in this country if we're willing to show some courage.
Next question comes from Teresa Flanders to Brendan Kelly.
What will you do to ensure schools here in St. Clair County and throughout the 12th Congressional District can enhance learning for students of all ages?
Yeah, we had a town hall in East St. Louis a couple months ago. Very, very well attended. And I heard from a lot of people there talking about the importance of education. And I think it's obviously a complicated issue because it's very much impacted by state policy. The federal government doesn't have as big a role as some folks think in terms of education policy. And we have a system where the funding of education separates us, the haves and the have-nots. And there's so many people who are left behind by the way we fund our education system. So to the extent that federal policy can help pressure the states to change how they fund education, I think we should. But I also think at the federal level, what I hear again from teachers, what I hear from students, what I hear from parents, is this one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach where it's just always driven by standards and tests, where we're teaching to the test rather than teaching students how to learn and how to be good citizens and how to be productive members of society, the skills that they need to be able to survive in the 21st century, that approach has failed. And particularly in communities where you have unique problems, communities like Cairo, communities like East St. Louis, where there is a cycle of trauma associated with poverty, with failed government systems, with violence that is brought into the school system. And we need to reorient our education system in many places to be trauma-informed and understand what those kids are walking in the door with, and arm our teachers with the information and the training they need to be able to teach to the kids in the way that is best suited to them, not some cookie-cutter approach that we keep getting pushed at by both parties in Washington.
Mr. Auxier.
I don't see that it's likely that the individual states are going to reform their education systems in such a way, the public education systems in such a way as to make them equitable for everybody. And for that reason, I've come up with the idea of single-payer education, public education. And what that means is not that we take away control from local school boards, rather that the distribution of funding that is now supported by property taxes, that it go through the federal government in much the same way that a single-payer health care plan would work. What that means is that the federal government could put certain minimums and certain standards, and I agree with Brendan entirely about teaching to the test. This is not the way to reform education in this country. But I do think that as long as property taxes drive the funding of school districts, that we're not going to get equitable school districts. And so therefore, I think that if the federal government is the disperser of the funds instead of some patchwork state property tax and local property tax system, that if those taxes go into a single fund and are distributed according to a formula that makes it possible for traumatized school systems to have the funding that they need, we could begin to turn things around. I also am an inveterate localist, and I believe in local control, but I think that when it comes to this particular issue, our entire future depends on this. I've spent my entire life in education. I'm a member of the National Education Association and the IEA, been very active in my union. I'm devoted to my union. But with that said, I think the gridlock between teachers' unions and school boards is just a symptom of a much larger problem of the way that we fund education to begin with. And so I would recommend that this idea of a single-payer education system be entertained.
Beth Hunsdorfer has a question for Randy Auxier next.
The 12th Congressional District is home to the most dangerous city per capita in the United States, East St. Louis. In light of that, would you support any form of gun control if you are elected to Congress? Please explain.
Yeah. I do support an assault weapons ban and bump stock ban, but I don't think that this is the right way to tackle the problem. I'm a localist. I believe that local people know what guns do in their own communities, and that there's a huge difference between what guns do in rural southern Illinois and what guns do in East St. Louis. Therefore, I believe that it is not unconstitutional or against the Second Amendment to empower local authorities to control guns. We've been having the wrong argument. The argument is not an argument over whether a well-maintained militia being necessary to the liberty of the free people is the primary issue. The primary issue is that guns that kill people are being misused. I trust local authorities to handle the gun issues in their own domains, in their own regions. I think the county sheriff's office is the proper place to locate this kind of authority because county sheriffs are elected and they answer to the people. And so I think that if the people want to control guns tightly in a county, they should be free to do so. And I think that if the sheriff gets out of line with the will of the local people, they'll let the sheriff know by not re-electing such a person. And so local control, we have a Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and if they can control the flow of alcohol and tobacco across state lines without stamps and taxes and symbols paid, then they can control the flow of guns across districts as well. And so I don't find myself at odds with the Second Amendment. I find myself at odds with the kind of debate we've been having over the Second Amendment, which prevents us from doing what's just sensible regarding gun control.
So, over the past decade, in my experience as a prosecutor, I have had way more experience with guns and gun violence than I ever imagined I would, or ever thought I would, or that anybody would ever want in their life. I can remember very early on as a young ASA going to an autopsy. It was in a murder case. I was a 15-year-old victim, and I can remember the doctor, the forensic pathologist, removing the bullet from that young man's body and putting it into a metal evidence bowl. I can remember the sound of that clink on the side of that bowl. And I understand the impact that violence has in a very personal way. And I've got two sons. One's in college and one's in elementary school, so I'm always worried that they may be the victim of some type of active gun violence. But I also know that if you live 35 minutes from Pinckneyville, it'll probably take 35 minutes for a police officer to get out there. If somebody's trying to hurt you or your family or your property. So I know that the Second Amendment exists for a reason. I have a Ford card and I keep it right next to my state's attorney badge. I know that the Second Amendment is there to protect us from, so we're able to protect ourselves from the very real evil that is in the world. But as a prosecutor, I make my decisions based on the evidence. And the evidence would show that there are some things that could reduce about 80% of the gun deaths in this country, focusing on trauma-informed education and trauma-informed services and trauma-informed social services in communities where that type of violence, where you see a young man killing another young man, that's prevalent in places like East St. Louis, that has a real effect. And also fixing the leaky, creaky mess of a background check system that we have. There's still way too many people who should never have a firearm, who are dangerous to themselves, dangerous to others, who are in the system that we've identified, but because of our old computer system, we're not keeping them from being able to have a firearm, and they're a threat to public safety. In the age of Google, in the age of Amazon, and all these systems, there's no excuse that we have such a terrible background check system.
Next question is from Jennifer Fuller to Brendan Kelly.
Mr. Kelly, what would you do over the long term to ensure access to quality health care for all?
Yeah, I had a town hall a few weeks ago, and this came up. It was a town hall in O'Fallon, and there was a woman named Sarah. She came in and she said that her husband, Bob, had died of a kidney infection. He died because they went so long without going to the hospital because they had terrible insurance. They knew if they used it, the price would go up. And this was almost 12 years ago. And she knew that when they changed the law on pre-existing conditions, that had a big impact on them because he had a pre-existing condition. That's why he had such terrible, terrible health care coverage. He had a pre-existing condition which was acne. That's why the insurance companies were able to charge him more money. And so when a new Congress came in, she made it her cause to make sure that those protections for pre-existing conditions weren't taken away. And she went and met with Congressman Bost. And he said, I would never do that. I would never take away those pre-existing conditions. And 10 years to the day of her husband's death, he voted to take away those protections for pre-existing conditions. And then he did it 14 times to take away those protections for pre-existing conditions. I would stand up for pre-existing conditions. I would also make sure that we are improving the access to affordable health care in the markets that we have, shoring up the market, and then looking at ways that we can expand access to affordable health care for everybody. I am open to any suggestion, any number of plans, both sides of the aisle, about how we can expand access to health care. But we're not able to do that. We're not able to do that because of the influence of money in politics. The big money that comes in from the pharmaceutical companies, the big money that comes in from the insurance companies, that prevents people of goodwill from both sides being able to come to the middle and solve the issue of health care. The people that are in power now, they control every branch of government, the House, the Senate, the White House, and they have not made our health care more affordable, they've made it more expensive.
I favor a universal single-payer healthcare system. It has been proven in a number of places that this can be done efficiently. I believe it will save us money. Right at the moment, there's a long paper on this on my website that I invite everybody to read if you want to understand how a single-payer healthcare system works. But plenty of countries have them. What I would emphasize is that right at the moment, if we don't do something about getting healthcare to everybody, we will cease to be competitive as a workforce. The reason to do this is because we have to compete with India and China, and they have a lot more people than we do. In order to be economically competitive with India and China, we have to have a healthy, productive workforce. It is in our self-interest economically and from a business point of view to see to it that people are healthy. With that said, you have to get the insurance companies out of it altogether. As long as somebody is profiting from somebody else's ill health, then we're not respecting the basic human right that healthcare is. And I think that keeping the insurance companies in it in any way at all is essentially inviting the profit takers into your personal lives, into your health. And as a result of that, you might end up dying because somebody doesn't think that your condition is worth treating. I think Mr. Bost's record on this is perfectly clear, but this is a difference between me and Brendan, because I think Medicare for All, that's a start. It's a step in the right direction. I don't know if Brendan favors that. I've not heard him say anything about it, but it's got 150 Democrat sponsors. And I think it's a good first step, but it's only a first step, and we have to move in the direction of universal health care, and unless it's single payer, and unless that payer is the government, then somebody's going to be making money off of your bad health, and that's just not good for this country.
Next question is from Allie Quick for Randy Auxier.
As it relates to criminal justice reform, what do you see as your role in ensuring that policies and procedures protect the public, but do not disproportionately affect minorities or the poor?
I was a criminal justice major. I don't know as much about it as Brendan does, obviously, since that's what he does for a living. But I did study the police forces and the structures of alternative policing programs, and have kept up with that since I graduated. With that said, I think what we need is a police service, not a police force. I think we need to demilitarize our police forces and get them back into the communities, not in jackboots and Kevlar. I think we need a police service that thinks in the first instance of what it can do to de-escalate violent situations instead of escalate violent situations. I think that there's a certain self-selecting kind of professional who ends up going into police work now, who's really quite different from the kind of professionals that go into police work in places like Europe, where de-escalation and a very high degree of temperamental calmness is really a requirement for the job. I believe we have not chosen the absolute best people to be our police officers, and that's going to sound like I'm opposed to the police, but that's not the case. I am for the police. I'm for the police being as peaceable as possible. It's not that I would cut their funding, it's that I would cut the funding that militarizes their view of the populace. And so getting them out into the neighborhoods, on the beats, walking, getting to know their neighbors instead of enclosed in cars. These alternative policing methods are the ones that I would favor, and they're the ones that I would like to see funded.
Mr. Keller.
This is an issue that I have a lot of personal experience with in my job as a prosecutor, and it's a difficult job because you've got to try to separate the lost sheep from the wolves. Those people who have made a mistake and found themselves on the wrong side of the law versus those people that pose a real threat to public safety. That's a tricky balance, but I think we've done a pretty good job of being able to do that. As a state's attorney, I did increase prosecutions 35% over the past few years, and violent crime in this community has gone down 41%, and that's by an outside study that shows that. But while doing that, we've done some great things in terms of being able to divert people out of the criminal justice system for nonviolent offenses, for issues of addiction, issues of mental health. I think this is actually a place where we as a country amazingly have the opportunity to be able to cross political differences and bridge that divide. I think that even President Trump has made some statements about the need for criminal justice reform. People who are involved in the faith community that may be very conservative or very liberal that feel strongly about the need for prison reform. There's a real opportunity to make sure we can protect the country's safety, protect law and order, protect our fellow citizens, but also make sure that we're fair and we're just. And this is a special place to be able to do that. And many people, I think, feel that in Southern Illinois. Like I said, I travel around a lot, and I hear over and over and over again, a lot of men and women say that they love their union, they love the Second Amendment, but they also want to be able to smoke as much weed as possible whenever they want to, without being prosecuted. And those are people in Southern Illinois. And those are the same people that are saying that. So I think this is a unique opportunity to be able to move the country forward and right-size our justice system. I have a lot of experience with that, and to the extent that I can be helpful with that in Congress, I look forward to it.
Our next question is from Teresa Flanders for Mr. Kelly.
What will you do to promote an in-depth look at leadership positions for women? And the second part of that question is, what have you done already in your own campaign or workplace to promote women and other underserved populations?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. As the state's attorney, my office, we have a large staff, and the majority of my office employees are women. Not just support staff, but a majority of the prosecutors are women. And the average pay is actually higher for the women in my office. And I have made it a priority to promote women leadership, to promote the ability of women to have success in a professional environment as a prosecutor, but also on my campaign. The overwhelming majority of my campaign staff are women. It's just something that I believe in. It's something that I think people who are supportive of me know that I believe in, and therefore they get involved in the things that I'm fighting for. So I think I have demonstrated over and over and over again the importance of developing women leadership, not just in my office as a prosecutor, but also in my campaign. I don't think Mr. Boss has a single campaign staffer that's a woman. And that says something. That does say something. So I have shown what my priority is going to be, and I'm going to continue to take that same approach when I'm in Congress. I think this idea that we need a change in leadership in my party because it's a particular woman, that is wrong. There are dozens of women that are ready to lead our party, ready to lead both parties, ready to lead the country. So I would be supportive of them, and frankly, I look forward to the opportunity. I can think of 6 women leaders right now I would very much like to vote for Speaker of the House.
I've spent my entire professional life in higher education, which is a sensitive environment with regard to these questions, and I have been exposed in particular to many different outlooks relating to feminism in particular, but also the diversity of people that I teach and the people that I've worked with has been, I think, commendable, because in the university environment, this has been a high priority for pretty much the entire time I've been associated with higher education. I have a lot of experience with people who aren't like me. I grew up in Memphis in the time when they were desegregating the schools, and ended up with a highly diverse public school education for that reason. And then I went to Memphis State, now called the University of Memphis, also a very diverse place, and I teach at a diverse place. And I'm very happy about that. I'm very comfortable with difference, gender difference, and sexual orientation differences, and racial differences, and religious differences. These are the kinds of things I deal with every day and have dealt with every day of my professional life. I would favor any measures that were before Congress that were designed to increase and empower the diverse elements in society. Part of the problems that we've had in some of the disciplines in academia been that they've been a little too slow coming along with diversification. But I think that I've pressed my entire life for a higher diversity, particularly in the philosophy profession, which is a bad one when it comes to that particular measure. But I've not had a whole lot of experience being the boss of anyone in particular. I will say that my campaign manager is a woman, and I do everything she tells me to do. My wife is also a woman, and I do pretty much everything she tells me to do. And that said, one of the lessons I've learned is that if I will listen and follow the wisdom that comes from people who aren't like me, I get in a lot less trouble, and a lot more good things come my way. I don't see any reason that shouldn't be policy.
Next question is from Beth Hunsdorfer for Randy Auxier.
This question comes from B&D reader Carol Firk. Thank you, Carol, if you're here. What do each of the candidates propose to eliminate dark money from campaigns?
Well, I favor publicly funded elections of the sort that they have in Great Britain. I think that electoral reform in its gradual, the gradual versions of electoral reform that we've tried in this country have not only not worked, but it seems like every time we try to reform the electoral system, it gets worse. As for dark money, if you mean somehow unrecorded campaign contributions, I have to say that I don't know very much about that. But if what you mean is things like the way that Citizens United has enabled political action committees to fund campaigns with impunity and without being answerable to the standard FEC reveals that are required, I would say that sort of thing really needs to change. Citizens United needs to be reversed. However, it does not look to me like the current Congress has the will to do that. And I'm not sure that anyone who benefits from the electoral system as it currently exists is likely to have the courage to take on that system. Nevertheless, I don't benefit from any dark money, I assure you. And so the Green Party accepts no corporate donations. Nobody controls me. And I'm not afraid of what anybody says when I step forward and I say, it's time we had publicly funded elections in this country so as to get the money out of politics.
I agree with public financing of campaigns, but there's a lot of things we have to do before we can get there. And it's funny you should mention that, because we actually have a plan that starts first with getting the money out of politics. The very first thing that I would vote on as a member of Congress and that I would sponsor is a constitutional amendment to end Citizens United. We have to get the dark money out of politics, the foreign money out of politics. All this money that's flooding into campaigns, that's the thing with dark money. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know who it's coming from. And it has corrupted our democracy. All these challenges that we're talking about tonight, all the things that we have to work on here in Southern Illinois, we can't work on any of those things because of the corruption of our democracy. The flood of money that that feeds the division, that drives the party to the extremes. That is the fundamental threat to our democracy. That's the thing we have to do first. But in addition to a constitutional amendment to end Citizens United, we can make it transparent. We can at least pass through Congress a bill that would show where the money's coming from. And I think if people in this country and people in this district saw where the money was coming from, they'd be even angrier than they are already, and realize how corrupt our democratic process has become. And that's the thing that prevents us from being able to do anything. We've got to do redistricting reform. We've got to make sure that we have greater ethics in the executive branch. We have to do the tough oversight that comes with being a member of Congress to get the corruption out, but we're not because of the flood of money in politics. It's the top economic threat, because it allows power to be consolidated in the hands of fewer and fewer people at the top. It's those campaign donors that put the money into the system that causes the elections to be resulting for policies that help them. It's an endless feedback cycle. And it also is a great threat to our national security, because it's one of the reasons we don't have a national security policy, because we are so divided because of the flood of money in the political system. This has got to be the first thing that we confront when we change Congress.
Our next question is from Jennifer Fuller for Randy Auxier.
Many young people today are heavily in debt, taking out loans to finance their education. This debt often leads them to delay the purchase of a home, continuing their education, or even starting a family. What would you suggest to ease the strain of student loan debt on young people, and how would you try to keep college accessible?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, it's something I face on a daily basis as I go into the classroom and I look at kids who are going into debt in order to get their educations, even at affordable places like SIU Carbondale, relatively affordable. There's no such thing as affordable higher education anymore. I favor the gradual forgiving of all college debt. And when I say gradual, I don't mean very gradual. I mean over the course of a couple of years. That is, in and of itself, one of the best economic stimulus programs that you could possibly come up with. Because instead of billions of dollars disappearing into interest and corporate pockets, what would happen instead is that people not only could buy their houses and their cars earlier in their lives, but in addition to that, they could be starting businesses, they could be doing all kinds of good things with the money that is being sucked into the hole, the black hole of student debt. That said, also we need some kind of a plan to make college affordable for those who have not taken the debt on yet, and for that reason I favor a heavily incentivized but non-mandatory national service program, the reward for which would be free college. I think, so I've taught 18 to 22-year-olds for 30 years. 18-year-olds need a couple of years of experience before they're ready to focus on their studies. I think we would be doing ourselves a tremendous favor in this country by letting the kids who grew up in the country go to the city and work on infrastructure projects and teaching projects, letting the kids who grew up in the city go to the country and work on infrastructure projects. And so heavy incentive, including a military option for those who want to go into the military, and better funding for those who choose the military option.
So last summer, the summer was beginning, and the end of the spring semester at SIU, I met with some students there, and there was a young lady named Jenny, and she was on her way out. She was a senior graduating, and I asked her, how do we help students and how do we help SIU? And this is not just an important issue for those individual students there, but it's also an important issue for the entire Southern Illinois economy. If SIU goes under, an entire region is going to go under. Southern Illinois will be even farther and farther behind if SIU continues to head the direction that's been going. And the reason it's been going that direction is in large part because of enrollment. So I said, how do we make that easier for people to be able to go to SIU? And she said a few things, and she said it had been difficult to be able to go from community college and maybe get some credits there early on, and that would be cheaper, and then finish up the third year or fourth year at SIU. So there are a lot of federal policies that affect how you transition from a junior college, a community college, which are great. We have great community colleges here in Southern Illinois, to be able to transition to going to places like SAU and finishing your degree. There's things that we can do there, which frankly should have a lot of bipartisan support. But the thing that is the most obvious step, and the thing that is offensive to me, and I think should be offensive to everyone here, is that the federal government still makes a profit off of student loans. Education is supposed to make life easier for you in the long run. That's why we tell people to get an education. It'll make your life easier. What the federal government is doing now is making life harder for people who are getting an education. So I think one of the first things we have to do if we're going to increase enrollment everywhere, including at SIU, is change the rule that allows the federal government to make a profit off of student loans. That has to stop immediately.
Our next question is from Allie Quick for Mr. Kelly.
What efforts would you support to reduce the effects of climate change?
Yeah, I have had an opportunity to travel all over the district, and this is a place that I've spent a lot of time hiking around Southern Illinois. We have some amazing natural resources, and I'm someone who believes in clean air. I believe in clean water. I believe that we should have strong protections for the environment. But I don't think those things are in opposition to some of the things that are important here in Southern Illinois, some of the Southern Illinois economy. So I do think that we need to invest in carbon capture. I think if you believe in science, as I do, that we as human beings are contributing to the rise in global temperatures because of the emissions of CO2. If we're going to figure out how we're going to be able to reduce those CO2 emissions in time to stop the rise in temperatures and to stop climate change, then we have to attack it from a multi-pronged approach. We have to invest in carbon capture. We have to do that if we're going to reduce the amount of CO2 that's being emitted from fossil fuels. But we know that if you look at a map of Southern Illinois, there's no wind, if you look at a wind map, but there's a lot of sun. This is the sunniest part of Illinois, is in Southern Illinois. And I think there's a real opportunity to have jobs of the future here in Southern Illinois in solar. And so those are some of the things that I think I would focus on in terms of improving our environment. But I don't think those things are somehow a threat to people here in Southern Illinois. That's something that's got to be a priority for all of us.
Obviously, being a member of the Green Party, I've been motivated by this kind of question for really my entire adult life. I agree with the suggestions that Brendan makes, but I don't think they go nearly far enough. I'm no doomsday person when it comes to the environment, but I do think that we have to move faster than we've been moving in terms of developing alternatives to fossil fuels. But fossil fuels are only one part of what's leading to human-influenced climate change. And so we have to think more holistically than just about sources of energy. Clean water is as important as clean air, and clean is not always the best word to describe what we need. What we need is efficient energy systems. And I certainly favor solar, wind, and the cleaner systems. In particular, I think that the development of mass transportation systems, especially in Southern Illinois, commuter trains that run preferably on something like hydrogen, but anything but diesel, because these dirty forms of energy are really, these are things that we do have the technology, we just don't have the political will to institute these kinds of changes at the moment. However, I have to say that I see positive changes, especially like the state's solar plan. I'm definitely looking at putting solar panels on my own roof for the first time because of the incentives. We can do a lot more of that kind of thing. I still don't think that's going to be enough, though. We have to cooperate with the world. We have to stop acting like somehow the United States, which uses about a quarter of the world's energy, it's not just that we're inefficient, it's that we're selfish and we're greedy and we're not looking in the long term at what we have to do in order to keep this planet habitable.
Next question is from Beth Hensdorfer for Mr. Kelly. Oh, all right. Sorry. Teresa?
The ability for local people to control what happens where they live is a vital in creating a thriving community. Discuss in detail your plans for engaging our local community and representing our issues both here and in Washington, D.C.
So I think if you want to know how I'm going to conduct business when I'm a member of Congress, I think you would want to look at how I've conducted business as a prosecutor, but also as a candidate. As a state's attorney, it's been my policy to call everybody back, go to every meeting, answer every call. I don't think there's a single reporter in here that doesn't have my personal cell phone. And there's any citizen that I've ever dealt with, they can reach me at any time. That's just the way I approach it. I believe as a public servant in a democracy, you report to the boss, and the boss is the people. Those are the people that you report to. And I think that means I will continue to do the town halls that I've done. Like I said, I've done 14. I've taken a pledge that I will continue to hold at least 4. I'd like to do maybe 20 of them a year because they're a lot of fun, and I learn a lot. I learn a lot. When you go out there and you talk to people and you listen to them and you look them in the eye and you hear what's going on with it, the concerns that they have, it makes you a better elected official. It makes you a better public servant. And I think it's just a shame that our congressman is not willing to do that because he's really missing out on something special. He'd be a lot better public official if he'd be willing to listen to people and have those conversations. If you're not willing to meet with the boss, you should be fired.
I think obviously we're both disappointed in the absence of the loyal opposition this evening. So I agree entirely with what Brendan is saying, and I would make myself accessible as well. And I think it's shameful that our current congressman won't do that. But I actually think that one of the things that has been overlooked is that a person who is a United States representative has an open door all over the world as well as all over the nation to go and seek business. If you're the congressional representative from a district and you make an appointment with somebody who is the CEO of a corporation, whether in this country or some other, you get in the door. And it surprises me how much could be done that isn't being done by our congressional representatives because they don't use their spare time to go and rustle up business for the area. And so I would want to form a coalition of mayors, a coalition of county commissions, and a coalition of business leaders in this district and take them places where I can get in the door and they can't, not without me. And so that's one of the things that I would do in addition to the things that Brendan is talking about. Of course I would be at every vote, at every meeting in Washington that I needed to be at, but in the off time I'd be talking to you, I'd be coming back and forming those coalitions and taking those coalitions to places where I can take them.
This hour has really flown by, and I really want to thank both of you for the high level of discussion that you've had and commenting as well. It's been terrific hearing both of you. It's time for closing statements now, and that was determined by the order of coin flip earlier. Randy Auxier will make the first closing statement.
Well, I'd like to begin such a statement by thanking everybody who was involved, the thoughtful questions, and thank Brendan for the tone. It's nice to be civil. It's important. I have a tremendous amount of respect for both of the people that I'm running against, and I realize that my job is to convince people who aren't going to vote unless something changes because they've become disenchanted with our system. I need to get the message out to those folks that I'm not like these other folks in Washington. I hope I'm a lot more like Brendan than some of the other folks because I have such respect for the work that he does. But with that said, I'm different, and we need something different at this time. I honestly believe in my heart of hearts that if everybody who hears me and agrees with me votes for me, I'm likely to win this. And I think that the fear of the status quo drives people on both sides away from considering an alternative. And I would very much like to talk to anybody who is afraid and say, don't be afraid. I'll make you proud if you vote for me. And if you agree with me, that's the reason to vote for me.
You would be my second choice. So.
And you would be mine.
I want to thank the people that organized this event. I want to thank you for all being here. This is a great tradition that has been carried on for many years, and I'm honored to be a part of it. And I know Randy is also. After I served in the military and I had the opportunity to go all over the world, see so many different places, so many amazing places in this country and around the world, I made a choice. I made a choice to come back to this place that was my home, where I went to grade school, where I went to high school, where I became the person that I am. I made that choice because I believe in this place. And my wife and I went to grade school here. We wanted to raise our family here. I believe in this place. And I also believe in the people. And there's a lot of people that have been hurt by what's going on in Washington, D.C. Last summer, my wife and I, unfortunately, we had to bury our niece. She was 8 years old. She had struggled with brain cancer for several years. And throughout that process, her mom and dad, who aren't rich people, who just kind of struggle from month to month to be able to make ends meet like many people, they had some health care. They had good health care. They had, at the end of her life, some hospice care, so that the end of her life was not a cruel and inhumane experience. That was there because so many people fought to have that type of health care there. That was there because of things like the Affordable Care Act, things like the CHIP program. My opponent, he has voted to take that away, So I know why he's not here tonight. And it's a shame. Because if he was here, he would have to explain those decisions that have hurt Southern Illinois over and over and over again. So you know where I stand. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you here tonight. Thank you.
How about a big hand for both of our candidates? Brendan Kelly and Randy Auxier. We also want to thank our panelists, Beth Hunsdorfer of the Belleville News Democrat, Jennifer Fuller of WSIU Public Broadcasting, Ali Quick of the Southern Illinois newspaper, and Teresa Flanders of the League of Women Voters of St. Clair County. Thanks also to our hosts here at Lindenwood University for all the fine work that they did, along with our friends at the Belleville News Democrat in preparing tonight's event. Our next debate is 1 week from tonight. It's live on WSIU Public Television at 7 o'clock. All three candidates are scheduled to be there. Thanks for joining us here at Lindenwood University. Good night.